Hi everyone, this is my presentation on mandalas in trauma, healing on cellular, conscious, and unconscious levels. Before we jump into the slideshow, I kind of want to give a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today, and also how we're going to end today's presentation. So overview is that we're going to talk about a definition of trauma, how it manifests in the therapeutic space for us as clinicians, as well as for the clients we may come in contact with, and also the ways in which mandalas can assist clients healing their trauma. We will end with and transition into an invitational activity of mandala making, in which I will model to you an example of how you can present and utilize mandala making in the therapeutic space. Now, the way that I'm going to present it to you, mandalas in particular, is just one of the many ways that you can integrate them into sessions. So maybe just keep that in mind and know that if you don't resonate with the way that I present it, if you feel called to utilize mandalas in your work that you do with clients, that there's a lot of different ways that that you can use them. And then if you have maybe questions about other ways you can use them, let me know and I can find some online. All right, let's jump into it. So defining trauma, and then also talking about the intentions that we have as clinicians when working with persons processing trauma. So the definition that I came up with about trauma was kind of guided by the APA's definition of trauma, as well as what we've learned in class. So I'll just read it out loud, and then I'll touch on the other points that are in this slide as well. So the definition of trauma that I feel is more of like a general, very general overview, I guess you could say, is that any experience that a person or persons go through that affects their feelings of internal and or external safety and or stability. In order for these experiences to be considered traumatic, they will have effects on a person's attitudes, behavior, and other aspects of functioning that are not only undesirable for this person, but they will exist over an extended period of time. And the next point that I want to talk on or make note of is that as we're moving forward, and even where we're at now in the work that we do with clients, it is recommended that trauma is no longer viewed as an area of specialization, but rather we show up with at least a basic knowledge of trauma. And we've been working on that this entire semester in this class. And this can be referred to as trauma competency. And the reason that this is recommended now is because before, trauma was sometimes referred out, or actually a lot of the times referred out to someone who specialized in working with persons who have experienced trauma. However, the experiences that humans are having today puts us in a place as clinicians where we can't refer all of these people out, because most, if not almost every one of our clients is going to come to us with some sort of trauma. And that leads to trauma competency on our part as clinicians, which means that not only do we have the basic understanding of trauma, but we have the basic skills and tools, and for us as EXA therapists, the basic activities to present to them in order to guide them, but also work alongside of them in their processing of their trauma. So trauma is a subjective experience, meaning that comparing trauma is something that had been done in the past amongst persons who are working in the mental health field, or those who just help others as their job or their volunteer work even. So what being a subjective experience means is that trauma is understood, processed, and even healed from, regardless of what the actual trauma was, uniquely by each individual. And this is because every person has their own coping skills and strategies, whether it be learned ones that were consciously learned or unconscious learned ones that were that are used to survive or were used to survive for them, and maybe even just get by. So it's important to note that comparing trauma with the goal of seeking to decipher which trauma is the quote unquote worst or even most severe is typically not helpful because of these factors that I said, which are their coping strategies, and also one that I didn't mention, which could potentially be their emotional bandwidth to handle their lived experiences of trauma. So along with trauma typically comes, in most cases, the co-occurrence of disassociation. And this is another area that we learned in class about that some clinicians in the past may not have been as comfortable working with. And that could be for many reasons, including the lack of experience working with disassociation, or even the lack of knowledge about disassociation. And sometimes there's also a fear that when working with persons who disassociate in session, like how are we going to get them back into the space? And that will affect the work that we do with them. But just being aware of the fact that disassociation happens to all of us, of course, in different manners and different degrees. But like even watching TV can be considered a form of disassociation because we're not 100% in our body and connected to what our body is doing. And some have even said that daydreaming is a form of disassociation. So working towards not being scared of disassociation and its relation and connection to trauma. Another point I want to touch on is the notion or the concept of rewounding. And this is important to consider and to also question whether it's happening concurrently with clients that we're working with, because rewounding is the idea that the trauma that someone has experienced is not necessarily still happening. However, it can still be being handled in not a safe and contained way. So we hold sessions for clients and we want them to know, and this will lead us into the intentions that I'm going to talk about. We want them to know, and we strive our best to let them know that we are holding a safe environment for them and that they're unconditionally accepted. With rewounding, they might not have this safe environment outside of the therapeutic space. There could be some other things happening that are not allowing them to get past their trauma and their wounds. So just being aware that outside of the therapeutic space, rewounding is a potential to be happening, and also working with them on that and just being cautious of that. Okay, so moving into the intentions that we can have when working with persons who are processing trauma. The first is that our sessions that we have with clients and the conversations that we have, especially about their trauma, are client-led. So they're done at the client's pace. It's not forced. And a big piece of this is that we are keeping in mind each client's window of tolerance. Another thing that we've talked about in this class and in learning each client's window of tolerance, because like trauma, it's going to be unique to each client. That just happens over time. So taking it slow at first, but also following their lead. So finding that balance and letting them know that, like I said, that we are providing them every time with a consistent, safe, and unconditional holding space, but also we provide them with unconditional acceptance. So they know that their stories of their traumas, or even stories of things that aren't trauma, can be held within the therapeutic container, can be said within the therapeutic container, and will still show up to hold them in that safe container, and to will show up in a consistent way. So I would say the overall intention in working with persons that are processing trauma is to work towards a place of release. That is a big goal for trauma, though, or a big intention to work towards, and it could take months, it could take years to get there. So in the meantime, alleviating symptoms that clients may show up with until the release occurs. So alleviating symptoms can look like helping clients to discover coping strategies that work in the present, or wait, like deep breathing, or even mandalas can help alleviate symptoms. Art is a great way because it is externalizing what is going on inside of their body and inside of their mind. Alrighty, let's move on to the next section, or the next slide, I guess, which is going to be the presence of mandalas in the therapeutic container. So, mandala means sacred circle or completion, and it's the center of most, if not all, if not everything in our universe. And this is linked to sacred geometry, which is a whole other topic, but they are highly correlated with one another. So mandalas can be seen in nature in forms such as planets themselves, so like the shape of Earth is a circle, right? Orbiting planets, Stonehenge, which was formed in the shape of a circle. The stones were laid that way. Fruits such as oranges or bananas. You cut into a banana, it's a circular shape. When you make the slices, spider webs, they start out as small circles and they slowly get into bigger circular shapes. And trees, which are similar to bananas, in that when you cut into them, it's going to start out as a smaller circle and get bigger. So that's just to name a few. There are an endless amount of ways that circles show up in our Earth and in our environment. And another neat thing about circles, and which is the base shape for mandalas typically, are that circles are usually one of the first milestone and identifiable shapes that children make. And then within these circle shapes that children make, it is also typically the first way that children depict themselves. So circles have a lot of foundational aspects within them for artwork that children do, and then also within nature and just the world and the universe itself. I wanted to give this general overview of mandalas because I feel that doing so will help understand why and how they can be used in the following listed ways within the therapeutic space. So the first is assessment. And the most known assessment for using mandalas is called the MARI. And I have a lot of information about it here, so I'm just going to go through it quickly. So when doing the MARI, I guess you could say the intention or the goal is to measure the totality of consciousness. A lot of the information I'm going to share about assessments are quotes, so their references are linked right here by assessment, and they'll be included at the end of the PowerPoint. So with the MARI, Kellogg, who developed the MARI assessment, colors used have links to the unconscious. That is the emotional, physical, cognitive, and spiritual components of our unconsciousness. And in creating a mandala through the MARI assessment, you will also be able to pick up on symbols that clients use. And this part's really interesting because the symbols that clients will put in their mandalas are guided by their intuition. And so when you present the MARI assessment to clients, it's a very simple presentation and invitation for them to engage with. You literally give them a white piece of paper with a black marker, or the opposite, a black piece of paper with a white, it doesn't have to be marker, but